Okay. Looks like a good group joining us from Benkelman. Okay. Thank you, Randall. Thank you. Yeah, if you would like, others, if you would like to follow suit, just tell us where you're joining us from today in the chat box as we approach our 2 o'clock hour. Okay. We will start promptly at 2, so we'll let others have a couple more minutes to join us, and then we'll begin with our speaker today. Jordan is joining us from Twin Cities out in the Panhandle. Val is also joining us from Congressman Smith's office, officing in Scotts Bluff. Carrie is joining us from Clark's. Welcome to all of you. And I know that there are many others. Cheryl Carson from Arnold Economic Development. Good to see you again, Cheryl. And I see that we continue to have people join us. We will begin shortly. So be thinking about great questions for our speaker today. See, Jill has joined us. Mary, so many of you, thank you for taking time out of your day today. Well, it is 2 o'clock, and I want to get a great and on-prompt start for our speaker today. If you are just joining us, welcome to the HomeNE Learning Network April edition. And just a reminder to go ahead and mute yourself during this time. But thank you once again for joining us on this HomeNE Statewide Learning Network. The South Central Economic Development District serves as the lead agent for HomeNE, which is designed to assist and be available to all people across the state of Nebraska who are seeking to successfully address their local housing challenges. And boy, are we all challenged by housing in our own communities. So today we have the pleasure of hearing from Kristen Olson. Kristen serves as the executive director of the North Central Development Center located in Ainsworth, Nebraska. And so Kristen, just want to say thanks for joining us today. Before we actually launch into your presentation, would you like to take just a few moments and tell us a little bit about yourself before we begin?
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity. I did lose my voice yesterday, so if you cannot hear me, feel free to speak up and let me know. I'm actually the Economic Development Director for Kippaha, Brown, and Rock counties. We are a 501c3 organization, and our contributing partners vary. So we have everything from schools to counties to villages to private sector. I've been in this position since December of 2005. Prior to that, I actually worked for the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Center for Applied Rural Innovation and also for the Nebraska Rural Development Commission. I've also done some contract work over the years with the Nebraska Community Foundation. I started my journey actually back in high school. So I'm probably one of the longer economic developers, I guess, in the state at this point. So I've been in this since roughly 2001. Just been in Ainsworth since 2005. So I've had some very amazing opportunities throughout the years. And as we all know, economic development and community development change, and they change very rapidly sometimes. And I think that's part of what our presentation today is really going to focus on is there's always progress, but it doesn't happen overnight. And sometimes it's very hard when you're in that position and you're really trying to move forward with projects. Sometimes there's a reason that those projects get put back on hold. And it's okay to reevaluate and reset and rechange your goals. As long as you're always moving forward. That's my ultimate theory, I guess. Economic development is a community that refuses to stand still. So as long as we are not standing still, we know that there's progress being made. It just may not be something that we see overnight. And I guess just a little bit about my personal life. My daughter and I, we actually live outside of Ainsworth, and my daughter is a rodeo queen. So we chase her goals and her dreams as she's working on her long-term rodeo queen career. So that's what we do in our spare time.
Well, wonderful. I am so looking forward to your presentation today. And as we said in the practice session, I love your choice of title. So we will turn it over to you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Again, if you guys have questions, feel free to include those in the chat, or feel free to, I believe you can raise your hand and we can stop and do a reaction on the bottom of your screen as well. Otherwise, we can answer additional questions at the end of the session. So progress and pauses, what's the story of Ainsworth? We actually started housing many, many years ago. And it actually was part of an NCIP challenge grant. So we were the recipients of a challenge grant. And as we know, NCIP is no longer in its place. However, it's been replaced with other programs and other projects. But that's really where we started. And it was actually the year that my daughter was born that we decided we're going to start to apply for some housing funds. And what that looked like, we really didn't know. In 2008, we applied for a NIFA grant. So if you're not aware of NIFA, I would highly encourage you to look into NIFA. We had an $8,000 grant, and we applied for a grant for 3 counties, including Kippaha, Brown, and Rock.
Kristen, okay.
I lost you.
You muted yourself. So if you could just continue.
Yes, I may have to have you guys take over my screen.
Okay, Sherry can do that for
Perfect.
you, I think.
I was going to say I hit enter and I mute now. Okay, so first steps again, it doesn't happen overnight. Apply for your housing study grant. It's a great resource that's available for communities. The next piece is do your homework. But just because a housing study is completed, make sure that you know the individuals that are working on your housing study. Make sure you're not getting a cookie cutter housing study. Some firms I feel don't always do as great of a job of expressing the actual needs of your community. You guys live and you work there, you know what the needs are probably, but rely upon those consultants, but make sure you do get the RFQs. Look at some of the previous studies that those consultants have done and make sure that they don't all look the same, because you want to know what really is happening in your community. You're also going to find that you have more than one need, or at least that was our situation. We needed housing of all sorts. We needed 55 and over, we needed workforce housing, we needed apartments, we needed duplexes, we needed single family homes, and there were also different ranges in terms of the dollar amounts that people could afford for housing. So make sure that you understand and realize that, but pick a goal, find your partners, and once you find that goal, don't be afraid to change the goal. Develop your team. So we had a great team, and I'll get into that a little bit here later. Also, always remember that don't be afraid to go back to the drawing board. You're going to hit stumbling blocks, and you may hit a lot of stumbling blocks along the way. And they're going to come at you from different aspects. It could be your community, it could be your government, it could be community leaders, or it could be your employers in your community. Not everyone is going to understand and appreciate your efforts for housing development. You may very well have some change in government that may change your goals. You may also get some flack from the private sector as to why is a nonprofit out here building houses. We are not here to compete with the private sector. However, when we first started with our first project, there had only been one home constructed inside the city limits of Ainsworth in 15 years. That told us there was a need. It also told us there was a need maybe for some demolition to occur, because a lot of our communities have very small lots. So sometimes you're actually looking at how do you acquire 2 lots to build 1 home. So just keep going and keep doing what you're doing until the private sector starts to step up and take its place. And then at that point, you guys as economic development directors or community officials, then you can ease up a little bit, and that's okay, because it is always better to see private sector development. Okay, screen change, guys. All right, so our housing committee that came together, we put a realtor on. When we listed properties, we actually had an open listing, so anyone in our area could actually sell our houses for us. But we did have one realtor. We had several bankers on our committee. We had insurance. We also had the lumber yards on our committee, because if anybody knows construction costs, it's typically your lumber yard managers. And then find the passionate ones, find the ones that really, maybe they're retired individuals in your community, but they're the ones that have the time. And they may be the ones that really like to pick out the paint colors, because we have found bankers and realtors and insurance agents, that's not their forte. So find a good team of everybody that can help out. All right, so the first one that we started was a housing subdivision, and it was the housing subdivision that never was. To this day, it's actually still undeveloped. It started out as our South Main Street project. We had a donor that we worked with who pledged 22.1 acres of property. So we were very excited about this. That's huge for a nonprofit. Unfortunately, we found out as we did our studies that we didn't have the infrastructure that we needed. So although we had a donation and it was a large donation, this was maybe not a good fit. It was going to cost us $1 million to move a water line. So therefore our housing subdivision was not something that the city of Ainsworth was interested in at that time. We already had our developer secured. We thought we were applying for low-income housing tax credits. And we actually found out it didn't make financial sense. We came back to the drawing board and we said, we're going to scrap this project as we see it today. We looked at multiple other sites. And as of today in 2023, we still do not have a low-income housing tax credit project. We've never had one. And that 22.1 acres is actually currently available again. So we are in the process this year. Our community is actually getting a new Main Street. So all of our highway corridors have been redone. So last year we focused on Highway 20. And this year it's actually Highway 7. So with that, we're going to include some infrastructure and we'll be project ready hopefully in the future. But make sure that you do check with those items, check your lift stations, check your water lines, because just because somebody gives you a piece of property, it may not make sense for you, and that's okay. All right, so 342 North Cedar was our first project that actually came to fruition. It was a very dilapidated home. We actually referenced it as the raccoon brothel. So there were raccoons, there were cats, it was unlivable, and it was a very small lot. Our committee came together and we decided that the government's not here to save us. We actually chose to do all of our projects without any government funds. And when I say government funds, I say meaning federal funds. So there were no federal or state funds. We decided that if we're going to invest in ourselves, now's the time to do that. And we had very limited funds for construction. We actually took out a $150,000 loan. And as you guys know, cost of construction right now is right around $200 a square foot. So a $150,000 loan does not go very far. So knowing that, we actually applied for the CDA tax credit program. And we were able to have the property donated, the asbestos removal, which was huge because all of our siding tested positive on this home. So the asbestos removal was actually donated by one of our contractors. He actually chose to pay that bill for us. We also had all of the demolition. It was my first opportunity to help actually physically demo a property. And then we also had a contractor who donated all of the concrete for the basement, the sidewalks, and our driveway. So we saved a significant amount of funds. So sometimes you have to be very creative in how you're financing your projects. Don't be afraid to look outside the box. And, you know, when we came out at the end, we were actually able to pay our note off in full and we did not lose any funds. The house was actually purchased prior to construction being complete. And we were very lucky because it was actually an electrician who purchased the property. So he was able to do all of his own work, which also brought a business to our community, as you'll see on this next slide. So this was kind of our icing on the cake. Not only did we get a single family home, but we also did bring a business to town. So we took a property that was probably generating about $100 a year in tax return for taxes. And so now we have a significant investment. You'll see the spec home is actually on the back side of that lot. So now we're able to have both that business and the housing construction. So that was a double win for our community. Okay. So the Cedar Street redevelopment project was our next project. And that was in 2011. Or I'm sorry, in 2011, we took a pause. And we realized that there were some other things in our community that really needed to be focused on. And one of those was a library expansion project. It had been in the works. We needed to get that completed and off the books. So we actually did a Reader's Digest campaign, which was a little bit wild. So it's okay to take a pause from housing, take a breather, let your committee redevelop or redevelop themselves and have a little bit of time to process how the first project worked. We then had two projects in 2011, two lots that were donated in this Cedar Street redevelopment. The demolition was actually done by our committee and we had a donor. I would highly encourage all of you to look at the tax credit program and also work with your accountants, because even though someone may be interested in housing, there may be other people that are willing to invest in exchange for tax credits that may have never otherwise been interested in a housing project. So sometimes your accountants can hook you up with someone that is looking for that write-off. So the one property was actually purchased by a private donor for the tax credits. And the other property we had pledged for donation and was not used for tax credits. We worked with our local fire department and we actually had a state training. So we were able to get rid of those houses. You still have to go through all of your asbestos inspections. But one thing we've learned over the years is anytime that you can burn a home as a training, your tipping fees and your costs are much lower, usually about half, sometimes even a little bit more. So this Cedar Street redevelopment project, we actually had a professional that was moving to the community. He had a large family. This property was actually located about halfway between our school and halfway between the city swimming pool and the park. So it was a great fit for his family. But in the end, we ended up losing that prospect. He actually chose another community to move to. So we purchased the properties in hopes that this was going to be his new home. So we went back to the drawing board and we said, we're going to reset, we're going to readjust, and we're going to refocus. Someone else is going to be interested in this property as well. So what we did is we actually cleared the lots. We went ahead and we subdivided those, originally thinking that we were going to combine them into one very large property. It ended up being two. And we were able to put two new homes. And these homes, our office actually just provided technical assistance. We worked with the developer and helped them in terms of their floor plans. So these are the homes that were actually built in the place. And even better yet, the nonprofit was actually not the developer, because as we all know, you guys are all busy. And housing is typically in a small community, not the only project that you have to work on. So again, if you can provide technical assistance and you can let that private sector step up, it's huge. And I would highly encourage you to do that. So 2012 was our next year. And this was actually the year of the fire. And I don't know if any of you remember that, but we lost a significant amount of acres in our community. So 2012 and 2013 were really rebuilding years. We formed a fire relief fund, and that's really where our time and effort focused on. We had some individuals that had lost some homes. We also lost some cabins in that time frame. So it was more providing that technical assistance and raising money. So our nonprofit stepped back, and we weren't actually any developer for a couple years. So in 2014, we actually had the Trailside Estates project. And this comes back to that original property where we said we've got 21.2 acres. We think we want to do some senior housing. We did not go back to the 21.2 acres. We actually found another location because we felt that infill was probably the most important at this point. Focus on where that infrastructure is. And sometimes that requires some demolition. In this case, we were lucky we didn't have any demo. We had a significant amount of fill to come up with. This property was actually adjacent to our clinic and also close to the hospital. So it made a lot of sense in terms of a 55 and over complex. So we actually formed an LLC, and it was called Ainsworth Builders LLC. We found a developer who was also willing to put some skin in the game. So he put some money in on as well. And they actually took over the management of the property, and to this day are still one of the investors. It's actually 15 units and every unit is full. So that tells us we still have a need that we probably haven't met every need in our community. So also working with governmental entities, sometimes you'll find that governmental entities do have property that maybe is not being utilized. And that can be a very good resource for your community. In this case, we actually had an individual who had 2 lots, and she really wanted to build at one point. It just never worked out. So if we had her 2 lots and the lot adjacent to the clinic, we were able to make this project work. So the lots were donated. Now, working with that governmental entity, you also have to remember that they can't just donate property typically. Typically, they have to sell it to you at essentially an assessed value. So keep that in mind. Okay. So here's our completed project of Trailside Estates. And it was 15 units, all with garages. And we debated this project for a very long time in terms of what size of a unit is acceptable and adequate. We actually settled on a 2-bedroom floor plan, which is kind of surprising because I think at this point today, we would probably consider that to be a very small unit. But again, know your audience, know who's going to be renting those units. So this was our vacant lots into about $1.7 million project. Okay, so 457 North Osborne Street, we actually had 2 nuisance homes, and they were on a nuisance list. There were 3 lots. We worked with our Board of Health. And with that, we also realized that the Board of Health had some properties that they had identified as being needed maybe to be torn down or significant improvements. Again, we worked with our fire department for a training. We had a highly unrealistic timeline. Our city came back to us and said, we really want to see construction this year. And we were going into the fall season. So number one, if you have contractors in a small community, a lot of times those contractors are booked maybe a year, maybe 2 years in advance. So that can be a stumbling block for you. So we went back and we said, okay, we can build a house, but you're going to have to work with us a little bit on this timeline. We're going into winter. This is not the perfect situation. So we ended up putting a Wardcraft home on this property. So we did not have a contractor, a local contractor that actually did the construction. However, the garage was completed by our local contractor. Use your housing committee. I know our housing committee spent a lot of time. We actually ended up putting insulation in terms of lots. This was one that we had very poor infrastructure. So again, remember that just because you have an identified location, it may not always be the best location for you to build. So it depends on what your risk is and what your community is wanting. In this case, it was a highly identified area. And honestly, I don't think that our housing committee would have chosen this location had we not have had a city that was pretty adamant about this was a location they wanted to see some development. So with this, this actually has a walkout basement. And as we all know, going into winter, that was probably not a great idea. We actually had our concrete poured, and Kristen was actually out there with her staff chipping ice out of the basement very frequently. So another issue that we ran into on this was that infrastructure. Our water and sewer lines were about 20 feet below. So that became a very significant investment. This was actually the first project that we lost money on. And we were okay with that because, again, we met the city's goal and we were able to continue to move forward. And we had a very nice final result. This house is actually, it was purchased and it is still occupied by the current purchaser. And it did bring a professional to our community. Again, not the original professional we thought we set out to recruit, but we actually were able to recruit administration for our school district to live in this home. Okay, so in the breaks, I mean, there's some things that had to happen between. We also had a nursing home that was actually going to close. So in 2015, we took a break from housing, but we felt that a nursing home was also housing for our community as well. We had about 30 residents at that point who were about to be homeless. They were going to be relocating outside of our community. So we stepped back and we said, we need to work on this nursing home project. And with that, our economic development office, the nonprofit, we were able to get the nursing home donated to us. It did actually go into a receivership. So that was a very trying time for our community. We also had individuals that were working at the nursing home who were not getting paid. So at that point, we were fundraising and trying to help them meet their monthly bills as well, because everybody was in agreement that if we could, we needed to keep this place open. With that, we formed an interlocal agreement, and the interlocal agreement was between the city and the county. And now they are currently the owners of the nursing home as an interlocal. So it's okay to take that pause and look at housing a little bit differently. So then we actually moved on to and a couple other projects with some demolition. And during this time frame, the Ainsworth Grand Theater came to us. We had lost a building in a fire, or it had been significantly damaged. And the committee came to us and they said, Kristen, what are we going to do? We can't fix this property. We can't afford to get rid of it. We don't know. So this became our new theater location. So the housing committee actually took the old building and we were able to sell it to a private individual. That private individual has used it for their business purposes now. So again, it was a little bit of a pause from housing, but this is our new location of our Ainsworth Grand Theater, and the nonprofit and CDC, we own this property, we developed it, and now it's back to a new nonprofit that is all volunteer ran and operated. Okay, Sand Hills Broadcasting KBRB building. This project was actually 3 different lots. One of those was a vacant lot. And then we also had 2 homes that needed to be demoed. And with this, again, this is not a housing project, but it had to happen because we did have those dilapidated homes. And knowing that, we needed to get those down. So again, a nice project with our fire department and a huge improvement to our South Main Street corridor. And also where my office is located. All right, so another project that's come up, as you're working on housing in your communities, you're going to realize that there's a lot of things that have to happen. And what comes first? Is it housing that comes first, or is it workforce recruitment? Because you cannot recruit residents if you don't have a place for them to live. But the other piece is you have to have somewhere for their children to go during the day. Because if you have employers, they need their employees to be at work and not at home watching their children because the daycare is closed. So this is a picture that was actually just taken a couple of days ago. And we decided that childcare was extremely important as well. So we've kind of taken a little bit of a pause from housing. And right now we're working on a child development center that should be open by the end of this year. Again, this project did not happen overnight. It's about a $2 million project, and we've actually changed locations several times. So again, don't be afraid to go back to the drawing board and say, to get housing, we need to have some of these other essential services in place. And just because you build a house does not mean they will come. Again, you need to make sure that you have healthcare. You have to have your community development pieces. You know, when we talked about the library addition, some of those things tie into recruitment and what makes your community sustainable and also enticing for people to move to. Okay, so where are we headed now? I'm actually going to back up just a little bit because there were some things that happened throughout the years that maybe were not direct impacts of our specific projects. There were a lot of things that maybe were goals that we did not set out to accomplish. Our original goal with our housing committee was we want a new development because there's only been one in 15 years. And we decided that we were going to measure that by property taxes. So that's always been our ultimate goal, and making sure that we can go back to our village and our cities and our counties and show that, yes, we have increased the tax base. So in the meantime, as we're working through some of these projects, you know, and taking tours of our communities, we really found that nuisance abatement was essential. So we did actually start a nuisance abatement program, and we worked with Central Nebraska Economic Development District, who handled our nuisance abatement for us. We also found out that just because you have a nuisance abatement program does not mean that things are going to happen unless you enforce what you have been doing for your nuisance abatement. So that became the next piece of how do we work with our local law enforcement, because essentially they were the ones that were having to enforce these. If there's not a ticket or if there are no consequences, that becomes a problem because there's no end result of getting some of these properties cleared up or moved. Also work with your city. When we send out letters, or when the city sends out letters, they try to include North Central Development Center because some people cannot afford to demo a house. And that may be why it's sitting vacant. It may seriously just be a cost issue. So we do try to include North Central Development Center as a nonprofit option if someone needs to get out from underneath a property. So that's an option. We did see that our Board of Health became more active, you know, as our housing committee was coming back to the city and stating that, hey, we need more lots, we need more infill. You know, if the city really keeps telling us, let's focus on infill development, we need your help and we need you guys to back us. So the Board of Health did really step up. It did also encourage our private development because we've now seen other individuals who have stepped to the plate and we're no longer always the developer. We also formed a demolition grant program, and the North Central Development Center, we applied for grant funds through our city, and those are tax dollars. It was actually a sales tax program. So we have had 6 lots that have been cleared privately. And what we offer is everyone can do up to 50% of a project up to $10,000. So we can at least help offset some of those demo costs. And once those lots are cleared, you know, that gives us an opportunity for either a neighbor to build a garage or build a house. I have one of these properties that's going to become a duplex project, and it will be privately developed. And we currently have 3 additional projects that have been approved, and we're kind of waiting on either spring or fall to get those completed. You see, I had a question about how did we fund that demolition grant program? So what we do is we actually have applied, we have Ainsworth Betterment. It's called the ABC committee. And with that, when the city collects sales tax, they have a portion of their sales tax that goes into a community development, essentially grant funding mechanism. So with that fund, NCDC as a nonprofit for community development, we can apply for a project. And so that's actually where our demolition grant money came from. And we also, I just had a question about LB 840. We've also used LB 840 money for demolition. However, our demolition program, the two are mirrored together. So whether it is being applied for through the ABC money or through the LB 840, our office actually processes both of those applications, and it has the same rules and requirements. The LB 840 funds, though, our city attorney and council is of the opinion that it can't be a private individual that's coming in and applying for demolition funds. It has to be a business. So knowing that business is eligible for LB 840 funds. I think Randall might have a question. Oh, okay. All right. So today we've actually acquired and cleared 22 lots since back from our original housing study in 2008. We have also developed some of these other projects that we've talked about. We've also started a facade improvement program in the city of Ainsworth. And again, not housing, but it does contribute to our overall community's mission of, we want to make our community enticing when we're out there recruiting, because workforce recruitment is probably one of our #1 goals. We have more jobs than we have people available. So that facade improvement program, I would say we're probably getting close to 80% of all of our Main Street buildings have had new windows, new doors, maybe some new paint, some new signage. So we've been prepping and being ready for Nebraska Department of Roads to come through and tear out our Main Street this next summer. Make sure that you also keep in mind that all of these partnerships that you develop with your housing committee, they will pay off in the future. We've been very fortunate. We have a demolition company, and Bruce has been amazing to work with through the years. And he's actually donated asbestos removal. He has donated demolition to our projects, but he also came through for us on many other projects. And one of those being the movie theater. He came in and he helped us with that. We also did tear down a commercial property that is now adjacent to the future home of the daycare. And it was a very dilapidated commercial building. And with that, our demolition costs were going to be right around 40 to 50,000. And this building was full of water. It was an eyesore, #1, but #2, it really was a health issue. So now that actually became our park. Make sure that you also look at those property owners. Like in that case, yes, it was a nuisance project, but we feel that those individuals that have nuisances, we can't as a community pay for 100% of their demolition costs. This is their property and they are responsible. So in that case, we worked with him and he was able to pay for half of the demolition, but he was able to turn that property over to us and then we paid the other 50%. So make sure that you're using your partnerships to your advantage, I guess, as well. Other partnerships that I highly encourage you are look at your fire departments. They cannot just go in and burn a house. So don't kid yourself on that. There is paperwork, there is red tape. You have to work with the state fire marshal. It has to be an approved training. But also remember that it may not just be your own community that needs those training hours. We've actually worked with our rural fire department and they've hosted trainings for us. We've invited adjacent communities to come over because a lot of times, they may not have as many opportunities for structure fires. So it's a great opportunity for them as well. Okay. So, sorry, I skipped around a little bit. So what's after the pause? Today we sit here and I know many of you have heard about the rural workforce housing project. Some of you maybe have been recipients. NCDC, we actually started this process about 2 years ago and we thought we were going to apply in 2020. And we came back and we said, we're just not quite ready. We don't feel that we have the staff necessary. We've got a lot of projects on the books right now, and we maybe need to take a little bit of a step back. So with that, we continued to develop our application, but this year we decided we're going to go for it. We've heard from communities that yes, it is a very long process. Sometimes you're not approved in the first round, and that's okay. We've learned from those things over the years that sometimes when your timing isn't quite right, there's a reason for that. And don't be discouraged. Don't be afraid to go back to the drawing board. So with our rural workforce housing, I talked about some of our partners over the years, essentially like our demolition company. I actually went to him and I said, Bruce, what are we going to do? We have all these houses. You have employees that are actually living in campers. What do you think about doing a really big project? And he came back and I was really looking for a letter of support. I wasn't actually looking for a financial contribution from Frontier Diesel. He said, well, let's think about this. Yes, I have employees and yes, I know they're living in campers and yes, I know they're cold during the winter. And we need to do better as a community. I wasn't gone for about an hour and I got a call and I was told, I'm going to give you your first $25,000, which is huge coming from a private business. But he did know and he saw the value of working with us over the years. So that $25,000 was really my kickoff. So our board came back and we said, okay, we're going to raise money. We're going to raise money for about a week and a half. So we were on a very short timeline. And we actually had $163,500 pledged in 1.5 weeks. So that was a pretty substantial contribution. As we're working on rural workforce housing this year, we actually applied as a 3-county area, so not just Ainsworth, but we feel that what's good in one community is good for others too. We did develop our application based upon a pay to play. So knowing that our community foundations in Rock County and Brown County, they also kicked in significant amounts of funding for this project. So they're going to, of course, want to see some significant impacts in their own counties as well. We have one county who did not have a housing study. The last one that they had was actually the one that we did back in 2008 and 2009. So knowing that, we did not feel that, number one, they qualified at this point. However, knowing that we had a county that maybe wasn't going to be included in this first round, we had lots of letters of support from that county that came in because they still have a housing need. And number two, I actually got a call as we were developing our application saying, hey, Kristen, I'll pay for a housing study. So again, that private sector stepped up. So that's kind of an inadvertent project, I guess, that you can see. So this summer, we will actually complete a housing study for our 3rd county that did not currently qualify. Since the time of our application, we've had multi-year pledges that have come in, and they were not ones that we anticipated. So we actually have more money pledged than what we started with or what our application to Department of Economic Development was. So those are some of the pieces with rural workforce housing. We are still continuing to do some of our other projects. Like I said, we have that daycare project that we're going to have that closed out by the end of the year. We're also working on a large community center project in one of our other communities, which would be Bassett. So we're getting very close, and construction will start on that this year. And as the nonprofit, our office or myself, we will be the owner's representative. So we know we have a lot of construction this summer. The other piece is, again, knowing those contractors. The first person that I went to when I found out that we were awarded our CCF project money for the Rock County project, I went back to my same demolition company, because he also does a lot of infill. And I said, Bruce, I'm going to need a lot of fill on this project. You know, we're a very low area. And he was one of the first ones that came back and said, Kristen, I know where there's dirt, and I know where there's dirt a lot closer than where you guys are looking. So he's going to be able to save us a significant amount of funds on that project as well. He's also, in the last couple of weeks, come back to us and he said, hey, Kristen, we're working on a fishing pond project that'll be going east of our hospital. So that project, we had a little bit of a snafu. It was a private donor. It was memorial funds. They didn't have quite enough money. So we went back to Bruce and we said, hey, Bruce, you have all the equipment. You can excavate. You can help out. The county is taking all of the fill. So since we're excavating a pond, we're going to be generating dirt for once rather than using it. So the county was able to work with us. They provided their staff time and also some of the labor to get this project going. But Bruce has also come back and said, let's look at another tax credit application. So again, find those partners because they're out there and they may not be the ones that you've always expected. All right, so key outcomes from today, I guess, or from our years of housing is housing does not happen overnight. There is no straight line to housing development. And you really have to decide what your community and what your committee are comfortable with. You know, you start getting a lot of bankers. I'm sorry if I have bankers on here today, but bankers look at projects differently. And that's okay. You need all of those perspectives to make sure that you're getting everything brought to the table, and don't be afraid to reevaluate. Don't give up, because again, I know you will meet some individuals in your community that are not going to be happy about you guys building houses. And that's just how it is. But I think our response has always been, we're going to continue to develop housing until the private sector steps up. So if your business is coming to us and this is not something that you're interested in, then why don't you start building houses and then we'll take a step back. We also have our contractors. When we put together a rural workforce housing application, we had 6 contractors who have worked with us on some of these other projects. And they all came back and said, we're more than happy to work with North Central Development Center again. Maybe it hasn't been on a housing project, but maybe it's been on a commercial project. Get that reputation, work with your guys. No economic development director or developer. I know Sharon and I have talked about this a lot in the past. Our forte is not to be over there checking over construction and making sure we're ADA compliant and have we met all of the rules and the requirements for electrical. Rely upon your state fire marshal, rely upon your state electrical inspector. These guys are there to help you. And I promise if you ask those questions up front, they are going to be much more likely to be helpful in the future. Also, make sure if you have a project, make sure you do your due diligence with Board of Architects. That was a learning lesson for us on a project. So make sure you know those things and use them as your partners. Don't be afraid to reset, readjust, and refocus. And you may have to do that several times. But if your community will not invest in itself, I promise you no one else will either. Now, whether that's state funding or federal funding or a private donor, if your committee and your community don't step to the plate, there's nobody else coming to save you. All right, I'm going to scroll through some questions here.
Yeah, Kristen, I can help you with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I love the end quote though on your slide. Do you want to just elaborate on that quickly and then we'll go to questions?
Yes, I guess this is kind of one of my own things. My interns have heard this throughout the years and probably get sick of hearing this, but economic development is a community that refuses to stand still. As long as you are making progress and as long as you are moving, even if you don't see development in that first year, even if you don't see that development in the first 3 years, it's okay. Keep moving, keep working. There's other projects that may need to be addressed first. Practice the pause. Don't be afraid to go back to those town hall meetings. Keep having those. Find out, are our goals still the same? And as we're working on housing, again, don't be afraid to look back and say, you know what? Housing was our main goal, but guess what? We may have to do something else like a daycare center or a nursing home in the meantime to come back to housing. So just make sure that you're always moving and that you're not standing still. That's our best advice.
Right. So yes, there are some questions in the chat box. I wanted to revisit. I may have misunderstood you. Did you recoup any of the demo costs when you in reselling the properties for development?
We did. So anytime that we funded a private, so with our grant portion, I guess, we actually were able to not be the owner. So, in that case, we actually made those grants to private individuals. So they retained the ownership. On some of the other lots that we did actually own, yes, we were able to recoup those costs. Now, sometimes you're going to have more in demolition than what you'll be able to sell that lot for. So don't go into this thinking you're always going to break even. I have one property actually on the north side of our main street that we're hoping to get to here this next year. And it would be perfect with our Main Street development project. But we actually need 2 properties and lucky us, we have 2 nuisance properties right adjacent to each other. However, one of those nuisance properties, we're looking at a $65,000 demolition project. It's an old base project. It's an old apartment complex. It is full of asbestos. I think anything that we could have tested came back positive. So our quote, this has probably been 6 or 7 years ago, came back at 65,000. And I'm sure that price has not gone down today. So, you're not always going to be able to recoup 100% of your costs. And I think that's where you have to get creative, use those tax credits, use your partners. The tax credits have been a wonderful opportunity for us. When I worked at the state with the Rural Development Commission, that was actually one of the most underutilized programs in the state. And they sometimes struggle to get applications. This year, I know they're actually out of funds for the year, but I would highly encourage your communities to check into that.
Okay.
The other piece is make sure that you're talking to your accountants, because your accountants do know people that need tax write-offs. Even if you can't use the CDAA program, if you're a nonprofit, sometimes they can donate cash and they're ahead actually by doing so. So if you have a 501c3 organization that you can partner with, I would highly encourage you to look into that avenue as well. If anybody has questions on that, feel free to let us know.
Yeah, we'll put up your contact information here in a minute, but Michelle also asked if you passed additional sales tax for the demo program, or did you set aside a portion that had already been collected?
Yeah, it's actually a portion that had already been collected. And actually they had been collecting that ABC fund prior to me even coming here. So I know it was before 2005. And a portion of that, it's a 1.5% sales tax that the city has. And a portion of that goes to debt reduction and a portion of it goes to the Ainsworth Betterment Committee projects. So we can't take responsibility for that, but we have been very thankful to be a recipient of some of those grant funds to be able to do these demo projects.
Okay, great. A question from Mary. Do you have a checklist of who to contact and keep in the loop, such as inspectors, for the properties, or do you leave that responsibility to contractors?
Okay, I don't leave that responsibility to contractors. We always laugh and say if Kristen passes away tomorrow, you should probably go find her vehicle and make sure you get her notes, because typically those are all in my phone or on my computer. I really don't. I guess I've been the primary contact for a lot of those. I could definitely put together a checklist if that would help some of these other communities out. I guess we've done enough of these projects, whether it be commercial development or private development or housing development, that we're just kind of in the know, I guess, of who we need to contact. But I could definitely put together a list for you guys if that would be helpful.
And maybe Mary can reach out or others as well. So I had a question for you with regard to Trailside Estates. You had 15 units. You filled them almost immediately. What was the ripple effect as a result of building Trailside? What did you see in your other housing within the community? Did that open up some homes? What happened?
So with Trailside, originally we thought maybe we would open up a few homes, but we actually had a lot of people from outside of our community. We're an ag area, so you have a lot of ranches that are being transitioned and family farms that are being transitioned. So we probably didn't see it open up as many homes within the city limits as maybe what we would have liked to have seen. However, we were able to bring those individuals to town, and most likely somebody from their family, a younger generation, is now in the home on the farm or the ranch. So it was still a win for us. It wasn't necessarily inside city limits, but when we look at a region, we did open up some housing within our county.
Okay. Any plans for additional, maybe 55 and over in your future?
Potentially, yes. I know that's something the developer may have to do something on their end. We debated this. Originally, we started out thinking that, man, I don't know if we can fill 15 units. This may be too many. You know, we really, really struggled on that project of what is the right thing to do. And today, hindsight's always 20/20, right? I wish we would have built bigger, but sometimes that's not the case. We do have some property fairly close that could be another opportunity for us. We do have a housing authority that we work with as well, so they have some available units sometimes, typically not very many at a time. We also have CNCS housing in our community, so there are lots of options. We have another property that is actually a USDA project, and our affordability period is up, so it's actually on the market. But we think that those individuals that are currently living there are probably going to buy the units because it's not a true apartment complex. So that one we're getting closer on as well.
Okay. Tell us the population of Ainsworth, just so that people who are not familiar with the community might have perspective as to the accomplishments that you've made.
Now we're a town of about 1,700 people. And so that's our city of Ainsworth population. And I would say that's probably a little high today, but previous census data shows about 1,762.
Okay. So you're not a large community in respect, but you have a lot going on.
Yes. One other piece, I guess, you know, again, we are a nonprofit. We're a 501c3. So I would highly encourage you to put together, you know, I've got a great board of directors and they span a great vast of knowledge. But one of the things that we had some foresight to do several years ago was we put together essentially we call it our business fund. And what we do is we have individuals and businesses who donate or pledge funds to us every year. Some of those have made long-term commitments, so it could be a 5-year pledge, and they donate those funds to us for the purposes of any project that is in our strategic plan for our community. And that's huge to us, because if we ever get in a bind and we need to find some additional funds, or hey, we have an opportunity. We had this happen a couple of weeks ago on a project where we had a week to turn around a grant application. And if we wouldn't have had our match in line, or if we wouldn't have had a source to go to, we would not have been able to pull that application off in a week. So I would highly encourage you to think about doing something like that, so that you always have a fund that could be used if or when you need that. Also, make sure that, like, when you're talking to your community foundations, make sure they understand that every dollar that they pledge, you're going to generate an additional dollar. Or in the case of rural workforce housing, it was every dollar that we raised or had pledged, we were generating an additional $2. That's a great return on investment for our community. So think about your sales pitch and how you're going to sell that to your community.
While people are maybe thinking of some questions or entering those in the chat box, can I visit your childcare
Yes.
project quickly? How many kids will you be serving, and how did you arrive at that number?
Okay, so I actually am not so much in charge of the daycare, so I don't want to give numbers today. I can follow up with you on that, but it is a center, so it's multiple classrooms. Each classroom is designated, and part of that will depend upon how many individuals we can recruit for our licensing, because each room or each classroom has to have a ratio that meets the state requirements. What we did is I actually contacted the C4K. So they were extremely helpful for our community. And we had a group of individuals who was very excited about putting together a daycare facility. So we actually turned them loose with C4K, really just made that bridge to help them out. And now I'm helping more on the fundraising and the grant writing side of things. Also working on some business financing, just so we can get this project closed out.
Okay, great. Mary asks, how many people are on the NCDC staff?
So when we first started this project, I had a staff of 4, and today I'm a staff of 1.5. I always think back to, our rural workforce housing application. At first I had gone, that first week we did our news releases and we said, we're looking for pledges. And my goal was we were going to raise $500,000 in a week. And we didn't meet it, and that's okay. It took me a little bit of time to realize that is okay, because Kristen does have other construction projects this year. We still have our demolition. And how many houses can I truly oversee construction in the next year? So don't be afraid to reset and readjust. We have in the past hired, I've got a former economic developer in our area that we were able to consult with on a project just to help us out. So our community is very good about finding ways to make that work. Also, our community foundation sometimes has interns over the summer. I've had interns over the summer. I'm hoping maybe I have another one. I actually have a meeting tomorrow. So make sure that you're, really tapping in on who are your volunteers, because it doesn't have to be all staff time. We're the lucky ones, we get paid to do what we do, but there are volunteers that really want to help see your community projects through. One of my original housing committee members, she actually is in Omaha now. She's moved to be closer to her young family. And knowing that, she was actually one of my first calls. I said, Renee, we're back to housing. I said, you were on our housing committee originally. And, she was the one that if I called and said, hey, let's go paint some walls today, she was my painter. She was also the one that kept telling my bankers, hey, we don't always need to build new. Let's go in and let's rehab some houses. So don't forget to look outside of your community. You have some alums that are really truly tied to your community. Just lots of resources. Don't be afraid to ask other communities for help. I hate to think how many times I've called Jen Wolf over the years. I've called Sharon. Sharon's been a wealth of information to me, the development district. I serve on Central Nebraska Housing Developers Board. So all of these communities are always willing to help. If you want to come and do a tour of some of our projects, we'd be more than happy to let you do that. Or if we can send you additional information about how we finance. That's how our project started. We really leaned very heavily upon the community of Stewart. So some of our original projects were modeled after theirs. And our committee, we actually took tours of Ord. You know, everybody's willing to help. You just have to be afraid to, or not be afraid to ask, and don't recreate the wheel, because everybody has done housing in some way, shape, or form. And what works in Ainsworth may not work for you. And that's okay. But we may have some other options or resources for you too.
Great. Great. Thank you. Are there any last questions for Kristen? We have getting close to our end time, but we do want to take advantage of her while we have her. We'll give her a moment here to breathe, but do you have any other questions for Kristen?
Hey, thanks, Mike, for answering my question.
Yes, Mike from First Five Nebraska thinks that the license capacity will be 46. So there will be families who greatly appreciate that when it's completed. So seeing no further questions or hearing no questions coming, Kristen, I just want to say thank you to you. We are reminding that everyone today that our past webinars, as well as Kristen's presentation, are located on our HomeNE.us website. You can check that out at your convenience. I was in Denver last week and got an email from someone saying, hey, I need to go back and look at a webinar that so-and-so spoke, and I don't know how to find it. And so I was able to provide her with information, and she was able to use the search feature on our website to find the webinar that she was looking for specifically. So it's a great tool. We encourage you to utilize that whenever possible. So, and to remind you that our next webinar is on May 18th at 2:00 Central Time. So, and lastly, I do want to give you just a little bit of an update. Once again, our spring gathering is coming up on Thursday, June 22nd. We're traveling to Central City for that. The Central City High School will be our location for the gathering. And we're so looking forward to that. It will be a morning of teaching and interactive conversation, as well as a tour of the Central City area will also be given. So registration is going to be opening very soon, and our early bird pricing, inflation has not impacted us. We are doing $99 as your early bird pricing. So when that registration opportunity comes around, please feel free to jump on that and take advantage of it. So, and, you know, just kind of a monopoly theme there will be free parking. That's an added bonus at the high school. So looking forward to seeing all of you there in June. So with that, are there any last questions or comments from anyone?
Hey, I just want to say I couldn't have scripted that for you any better, Kristen. I am thrilled with what you had to say, because it's all the things that we repeat over and over and over. So it is awesome to see that at work year after year after year in your community. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yes.
Thank you, guys.
Yes, thank you. And so with that, we will conclude, and I will wish you all the best with the rest of your day, and have a great rest of your week as well. So thank you so much. And Kristen, thank you again.
Thank you, Lori.